Now, this is a really crucial concept that's going to be important in understanding the later part of the lecture. And this is a question of a line item veto. So let me first be clear, before I even describe what a line item veto is, the president doesn't have one. Some governors have a line item veto. The president does not. That was something that was debated, discussed, and it was rejected at the Constitutional Convention. So presidents do not have a line item veto. And then sort of more importantly, the way you should think about that is presidents should not have a line item veto. The framers didn't intend it. The Constitution doesn't give it to them. They don't have one. They shouldn't have one, period. Now, having said that, so now that you know that and you're clear on that, the president does not have a line item veto, or at least a constitutional line item veto. Let me explain what a line item veto is. Suppose you have a bill, Phil's corn law we're talking about, and we're going to assume that for the sake of discussion that there are 4 provisions of this bill. So we're going to do some of these incredible graphics that I'm able to do. So bam, there's one part of the Phil's corn law. There's another one, there's another one, and there's another one, and now, well, okay, I don't know if that worked, but, oh, forget it, too hard to do. There we go. There are the 4 provisions in the bill. You can see me in the background doing it. So there are 4 provisions in the bill, right? In a line item veto, what the president could do is he could say, you know what, I like this part of the bill, and I like that part of the bill, but I don't like that. And I do like that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to veto that part, and I'm going to sign the rest into law. That would be a line item veto. The president could go ahead and take this part of the bill out and just get rid of it and say, I'm vetoing that. That one doesn't pass, but everything else, let's do it. Presidents do not have that authority. The president has the ability to say, I'm vetoing the whole bill, everything, out, and if Congress can override it, they can pass it, or nothing. But the president cannot pick and choose between parts of the bill and decide that one part or the other is going to be eliminated and everything else is going to become law. That's what a line item veto is. Now, governors can actually do that. Some states have given governors the authority to do a line item veto, and the idea being this, that sometimes if a state passes a bunch of laws or bills, and some of them involve spending money, that a governor can say, we're not going to spend this money, and that money, and they can actually veto certain provisions that spend money, and then send it back to the state legislatures and say, see if you can override this. But when it comes to the federal government and the president does not have a line item veto. Never has, never should, unless we change the Constitution. So keep that in mind, because we're going to come back to that later on. Now say goodbye to Phil's corn law. Okay. Next, I want to talk about the role of the president as commander-in-chief. And this is a very important power that presidents have, and especially during modern times. But Congress played a very important role in the United States going to war as the framers set it up. So if we were going to go to war, so for example, the Constitution gives Congress, right, the authority, well, okay, let me go back to the lecture notes. The role of Congress, it says, and then it says, framers were afraid of standing armies. Well, what do I mean by a standing army? A standing army would be an army that is loaded up with weapons, trained and ready to go at a moment's notice. They're like standing at attention and waiting. When the president says, let's go to war, the army can go with them. The framers are really worried about having a standing army because they'd been subjected to the standing armies that were here in the colonies that the British government had. And so their idea was, you know what, we're not going to have a standing army. And what they did is they said, we're going to give Congress the power to essentially start a war. There weren't going to be standing armies, so what they gave Congress the power to do was to raise and support an army. In other words, if we're going to have an army or a navy, then it'll be up to Congress to spend the money to get everything together, to get the weapons, to get the troops, to pay everybody, and for all the provisions that would be needed to pay for boats and for people to man the boats and all that kind of stuff, Congress would have to pay for it first. Then Congress was also given the authority to declare war. And so they could give, so in other words, they could put in order for the U.S. to go to war, Congress could put together an army, they could go ahead and declare war, and then the president would lead us off to war. That's the way it would go. So Congress had a lot of power. Congress had to put together an army in order for the president to have somebody to lead. So the key is, in order to wage war, the president needed Congress to act in order to wage war. The president needed Congress to do something first. And then once the Congress did something, then the president could go ahead and say, hey, let's go. Because otherwise what would happen is the president would say, I think we should go to war. Okay, let me go get my troops and let's get all our stuff. Let's go, everybody. And there'd be no one there. So that was the idea, to go ahead and give the Congress the ability to basically put all the weapons and men together and the provisions needed to wage war, give them the authority to declare war, and then once Congress has done all that, to go, here you go, Mr. Commander-in-Chief, now you can go ahead and wage war. Well, nowadays, a standing army is essential in the United States. You have to have a standing army. With how quickly the world works, you need to have an army at the ready. Every country in the world has a standing army. It's just impossible to go ahead and not have a standing army. And so the way it works right now is the president can basically start a war without Congress doing anything. Let me give you an example. Or at least the president can engage in a war without needing Congress to do anything. Not too long ago, the United States got involved in a war in Libya. And the Congress never voted for it. The Congress never passed anything saying, let's go to Libya. President Obama went ahead and decided that it was in the best interest of the United States to go ahead and help bring down the leader in Libya, Muammar Gaddafi. And so he ordered troops into the Mediterranean Sea, and then for 2 days those troops attacked the Libyan government in the stronghold where Muammar Gaddafi had his troops. And then after 2 days, he pulled back, and then instead of going ahead and actually doing the bombing, and I'll explain why later, but instead of doing the bombing, the U.S. then stayed in the Mediterranean Sea and then guided other countries while they did the actual bombing themselves. So the U.S. was sort of not involved in the fighting. Congress didn't vote for anything. Congress didn't say anything. Congress couldn't do anything because the president was already there. The president had ordered the troops. The fact that there's a standing army, the fact that they can respond so quickly, the fact that the president is in charge of that army significantly changes the role of commander-in-chief. It makes the president and it makes the role of commander-in-chief more powerful just because the world has changed so much. Now, let me be clear. President Obama is certainly not the only president to go ahead and use military forces this way. Other presidents have done the same thing. But whereas the framers had a more limited role or idea of what the commander-in-chief would do, nowadays the role of the commander-in-chief is significantly more important, and the president is significantly more powerful relative to Congress than the framers originally intended. Now, another power that the president has the power to negotiate treaties. Now, when I talk about negotiating treaties, a treaty is basically an agreement with another country. And the president is, in fact, what we say, the expression that we use is the sole voice of the nation in foreign affairs. Only the president can go ahead and negotiate agreements with other countries on behalf of the whole country. The governor of California can't go ahead and sign a treaty with China and say, this is what we should do. So the president goes ahead and negotiates treaties or agreements with other countries. But once again, what the framers wanted to do is they wanted to make sure that the president exercised power, but that Congress could check the president, could keep the president in his place. And so the president can go ahead and negotiate whatever treaty he wants. But when he's done, he's got to come back and the Senate has to approve the treaty for it to become law. And how much of a vote does it take in the United States Senate to approve a treaty? 2/3. 2/3 of the Senate has to agree. And so when the president may have all the power he wants to go out there and negotiate those treaties, but if he can't get 2/3 of the senators back at home to go ahead and agree to it, then it doesn't become law, and that's that. So even then, this is a case where power was given to the president, but even still, Congress, in this case the Senate, plays a central role. Next, I'm going to talk about some other powers that were granted to the president, and then we'll move on to a different topic, and that is the expansion of presidential power. And that will be Presidency 03.